Hello, we're excited to have you here. This is the first kickoff to our National Coding Week series of events. Welcome to Flatiron School's Coding for Design, software engineering tips for product designers. My name is Corey Mickelson. I'm the event coordinator here with Flatiron School. A big part of my job is hosting free events like today and give you the opportunity to meet some of our team and get a better feel of the Flatiron School experience. So a quick reminder, we're using the chat as the main source of communication today. So make sure that little blue button is switched from host and panelist to everyone so we can all chat together. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest for today. Stephen is here representing our admissions team. Say hi.
How's it going, everybody?
We have Thompson here representing our software engineering team.
Hey, everyone. How's it going?
And Joshua is here representing our product design team. Go ahead and take it away, y'all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Corey. Appreciate the invitation. And today we're going to be talking about the interdependence of coding and design. Before we dive into that, though, I thought maybe we'd share a bit of our backgrounds. So Thompson, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you share your background and what you do here at Flatiron.
So I am a software engineering lead instructor with the enterprise team, currently serving the 2023 Amazon cohort, which graduates in 25 days, which is amazing. I am myself an alumnus of Flatiron. I have a background in Ruby, JavaScript, and Python, and React, Flask, and Rails. But I think it's also worth noting for those of you who haven't yet embarked on the same journey that I attempted to learn how to program 5 times and quit 4 of them and ran away screaming because I have an art school degree. So I had a lot of internal issues saying, I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing, and so on and so forth. So that's my my background. And I have a beautiful dog named Buffy, and I live in New York City. That's me.
Thanks, Thompson. And I am Joshua Robinson. I'm the director of the product design program here at Flatiron School. So I've been a product designer for about 10 years now. And I specialized in UX design first and then transferred over to UI design. My background is not in art or coding or math or anything like that. So I have just a bachelor's in history, which has served me not at all. So it took me a while to find my way, but like Thompson, I am also a graduate of one of the first design boot camps in the country, of which this program is sort of a descendant of, through some very interesting turns of events and acquisitions. So I graduated a boot camp in 2013 and went into advertising technology, doing UX design. Worked on a lot of interesting platforms with machine learning, early machine learning, and advertising tech, and then moved into education technology and finally came full circle back around to teach at Flatiron School. And then eventually took over the relaunch of the product design program in 2021. So I think this is a great pairing. 2 handsome gentlemen here looking at you. So I'm excited to dive in. If you've attended many or any of my sort of discussions and talks, they tend to be less presentations and less teaching. We all do a lot of teaching around here, so it's nice just to have discussions. It's nice to slow down a little bit and dig into some of the topics rather than jumping from slide to slide. So there's not going to be a lot of teaching going on, but there may be some interesting snippets that you find from the discussion between Thompson and I. So without further ado, we will continue to talk about this, and I will be monitoring the webinar chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in there, and we will probably just stop and answer them in the moment. So whatever you're interested in, we're probably interested in discussing, as long as it has something to do with software engineering or product design or Thompson's dog. Happy to pause to talk about pets as well. Okay, so what I'd love to do is talk about understanding each other's language. So as a product designer, I took it upon myself to try to learn a little bit of coding basics early on. Okay. I wanted to be able to do some simple things I wanted to learn a little bit of HTML and CSS, and that's about where it stopped for a year or two. Okay, so I could do a little bit of web design. I quickly figured out, however, that there was sort of a bottleneck where I could make things on the web, but I couldn't really change behaviors. I couldn't really make my designs do anything, right? So the whole point, I needed to learn a bit of programming in that JavaScript. Okay, so JavaScript is controlling a lot of the behaviors of the design in the web. So I started to learn a little bit of programming. And then because I was in advertising technology, working on platforms with machine learning and advanced AI algorithms, I had to learn some Python. So I quickly learned MySQL and Python to get into like databases. And it was all just really, really fascinating. Now, obviously, no one would let me near a production environment with coding, but I picked up enough principles that I started to understand what the goals were of my fellow software engineers, right? I started to understand the constraints and the principles that they operated by. And so I was able to be a much better designer. And the resources that I tended to utilize, you could see here on the left, I used Replit courses, GitHub documentation. GitHub is just a fantastic tool that you're going to want to learn to use if you want to collaborate with software engineers. For web design, Mozilla Docs are excellent resources. Design Plus Code, a lot of great tutorials and courses on the Design and Code website. And then the CSStricks.com website is the authoritative source, I'd say, on being able to do interesting and innovative things with CSS. So that's how I started to learn to code. Is I took it on myself to do some self-study, but then I just worked on projects where I cared about what was going on under the hood, so to speak. I cared about how my fellow teammates went about their daily work. And so I was able to become a better collaborator. So that's sort of my story. Thompson, how did you become, I know you have an art background, but how do you collaborate with designers?
So my background when it comes to design is very much from the code as an implementer, and that's why to me the operative parts there, obviously GitHub, although it's always about the collections of lists there, but CSS Tricks is all the links on CSS Tricks are purple in my browser, but I basically one of the things that people figure out when they take a course on development, particularly web development, is that you kind of realize that a lot of people realize that they gravitate more toward front end or back end. And my heart is just always going to be in the pretty things. I love seeing beautiful animations. I love watching interesting scrolling events. I think, every time I see a tiny little bit of particle explosion when somebody hits a button, I'm so delighted. I'm like a child. And so to me, I love, from that middle section, the awards website. Also, Dribble is another one it's a really cool website. Awards and Dribble are often impractical. CodePen often has things that are sometimes impractical because when I say impractical, what I mean is that one of the things that I think about as a developer, especially as I've worked more, is that you really, really, really have to think about the person in the middle of Oklahoma who still has a 3G connection. And so a lot of the things that drew me the most to web development are actually kind of not optimal for the most users and about being considerate of users on every platform. And so that has also informed a huge amount. So I got into it from the standpoint of somebody who went to film school, who went to art school, and like wants to make cool, explosive things. I have I worked in visual effects and motion graphics for 10 years. And as I've become a developer and as I've, had people have difficulty with websites, my design focus has leaned more toward, hey, how does this work for visually impaired people? What are the contrast problems here that are going to be a real issue for colorblind people? Am I being considerate of people on teeny tiny mobile screens and people on big honking wide screens? And so that's kind of the way that I've always thought about design, is how can I be as inclusive as possible? And in that, at first I was like, how can I make all the explosions on the screen? And now it's, can I be as inclusive as possible? And also, can I fit an explosion in there somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is you slowly start to learn that constraints are a really good thing. The border around the frame around the picture, right? Like is what you need to sort of even have a picture in the first place, right? You need borders, you need barriers and constraints. So we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. So there are some common practices that we tend to see in well-functioning teams, product teams. Okay, now I'm going to use the word team to mean comprised of probably a product manager who is defining some of the requirements, who is representing the customer and what the customers are asking for. And who's kind of guiding all the people on the team to a successful launch of a product or feature. So that's the product manager. Then a designer, this might be a UX designer, a user researcher, UI designer, the same person doing all those things, or 3 different people doing each one. And then 1 or more software engineers that are working either on the front end or back end. And then I'm also going to define that as a tester, someone who does quality assurance, who makes sure that all of the use cases are accounted for. They try to break the design, they try to break the implementation and figure out, because if it can be broken, customers will find a way to do it. Okay, so that's why you have a QA engineer, hopefully, on your team. So in a well-functioning team, there are some common practices that tend to take place. And one is having an effective way to give feedback to one another. Okay, so establishing effective feedback loops and constant collaboration and communication help you iterate and refine the work so that you are de-risking the possibility of broken functionality or the design being not correct or inconsistent with the rest of the product. These teams also do something called retrospectives or retros. Right? This is another feedback loop. This is a way to reflect and learn on maybe the last month of work that you did, or maybe the last feature launch. And those retrospectives, you're meant to document everything that went well, everything that did not go well, and what could we do better next time. So what you see is this looping of constantly refining and getting better and learning as a team. So it's an iterative process. Now, we talked about constraints just a minute ago. Constraints are a big part of that iterative design process. Designers, for better or worse, are notorious for sort of wanting everything in the kitchen sink, right? They always want every flashy thing. They want every, and it comes from a good place most of the time, right? They're representing the user experience. They want the customer to have the best experience, but that can come at a cost. That can come at a cost in time, resources, from the implementation, from the software engineers. So you're not going to get everything that you want, right? You're usually going to start out big and showy and then slowly like whittle down to like the core value, right? Because what is the thing giving the value to the customer? Thompson, I'd love to hear your thoughts here about designers. You're not going to get everything that you want, right? What would a designer do with that, right? Like if we have to shave off 40% of this functionality and we have to ship it at the end of the week, like what do we do with that?
Well, I think it's like it's the thesis of this slide. It's the constant back and forth. And the thing that I think the one that I always want to come back to is responsive design. And you can get something that looks amazing in one format, and then your design can be obliterated when it's moved to a smaller screen or to a larger screen. And so and so part of that is the discipline of the designer has to think like that, where there's a point where which a good designer, if you're working in a web platform, is already hopefully going to be thinking like that, where it's like you just don't have the white space. You just don't have the white space in a mobile that you're going to have in a desktop, and that the way that you're consolidating your white space in mobile is going to be is going to look weird and inappropriate on a desktop. And so those trade-offs are something that need to be constantly thought about, because if you're a developer, you're thinking about you're implementing those constraints because you have to be thinking about, like, how is this going to spit out across the screen? How is this going to be truncated across the screen? If I get a value, if for instance, if I get something from a designer that says the left margin is 50 pixels and the right margin is 50 pixels, and I go, right, but how does that change depending on how wide the screen is? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so that's a matter of a designer respecting the fact that those pixel values make sense on Photoshop. Those pixel values might even make sense in Figma. Those pixel values might not make sense when we're thinking about the fact that they go whoop, whoop, over the course of, that's an official term, by the way, whoop, in the course of changing to different devices. And by the same token, it's that same iterative process where, again, thinking in terms of accessibility, where there are accessibility settings that say prefer reduced animation, prefer reduced motion. And as somebody who loves the particles and the explosions and the background animations and all that stuff myself, I'm always loath to give it up. But you have to think about the MVP. You have to think about the minimum version of the site that is going to actually accomplish what the site's mission, right? Because the site's mission is presumably to sell a ticket, to put a product in someone's mailbox, to get a client working with a client, right? To perform a function, to get a product out there, to announce a service. Like, there's a discrete mission, and everything about a design is in service of that. And and it's only by having that back and forth where you have a developer who has at least a little bit of design training, and you have a designer who has at least a little bit of development training, where those trade-offs are an understood, known, and anticipated part of the process. I think if either side jealously guards their fiefdom too much and isn't respecting the feedback that they get and isn't humble about that feedback, right? You have to, like, it's like the designer has to be humble before the coder, and the coder has to be humble before the designer. And everybody knows of those disciplines, known well, far and wide for their humility.
Yeah, us and surgeons, those are.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important point. Everything is subservient to, some larger goal of whatever you're trying to get the customer to do, or whatever pain point you're solving for, and bringing that back, as the guiding sort of North Star of things can often make a lot of decisions for you, right? You can kind of offload a lot of decision making when you come back to focus on that. But the other thing I think you said real quick, that
I just want to point out, we have a question, so I don't want to ruin your flow, but it looks like we have a question from the audience whenever you're ready to take it.
Okay, great. Well, it ruined my flow, so let's do the question. I love it. It's probably better than me talking anyway, so let's dig in. What's the question? I don't see any.
Yamuna? We have a question from, it looks like Yamuna Umapathi. So you can either put it in the chat or you can come off mic. I don't know if we can actually allow you to come off mic. I'm not sure if we have that capability, but we see your hand raised. So if you'd like to say it, we would love to hear from it. And if we don't, then we'll move on, because we don't
Yeah.
want to cluster. But I know that there's a little bit of a delay between us asking. So this is currently me vamping while you type your carefully worded question. And Joshua says, Thompson, hello,
No. While she's typing the question, the other point I was picking up from you, and it just reminded me that, there are so many good resources out there that we could recommend hundreds of them. At the end of the day, nothing will make me a better designer than working with really good software engineers, product managers, people that are not designers, in other words, right? I think, again, if you think the ultimate goal is to ship something and get it into customers' hands, like that's the type of designer you have to be.
Yeah, I think it's I think one thing that gets lost a lot of times in a lot of things, right, is because craftspeople like to practice their craft. And a well-told joke knows the punchline in advance. A well-told story knows the emotional payload. Chekhov's gun is a gun in Act 1 that fires in Act 3. And developers and designers just have to have the end in mind, right? And so it does, whether it's moving a product or some or broadcast, advertising a service or whatever it is, everything's got to be about what the actual intention is, and everything has to serve that intention. So
yeah, the last point on here just illustrates and sums that up with the parable of the blind man and the elephant. So that parable, if you're familiar with it, goes that there were a group of blind men who stumbled on an elephant, and because the elephant is so big, they each began sort of feeling a certain part of the elephant. And the first man said, well, this is obviously a tree trunk, right? This is a tree. And the other blind man was feeling a different part of the skin and said, no, this is something else. And the third man said, oh, this is the tail or something that is different, right? And they actually come to blows because they can't agree on what the elephant actually is. So the sort of takeaway of that, right, is that we get really defensive, but we're always operating with incomplete information. And if we're intentional, right, to going and widening out, we can have better information and make better decisions together by being collaborative. Okay, so this is going to be a fun slide, and I've listed some of the challenges. What are some of the barriers to good collaboration between designers and software engineers? So I'm going to kick it over to you, Thompson. I choose one in this list of some of the barriers to good collaboration.
Stakeholders, no question.
Okay, go.
Stakeholders. No, it's just no question. If you like, to me, like the best situation is a benevolent tyrant, right? It's somebody who has the authority and the persuasion to say yes and no, and has the presence of mind to check up, right? It's if you don't have everything in place where they can say, this is how it should be done, this is how it shouldn't be done. They haven't and you delegate to managers to verify that it's done the right way, and to inculcate a spirit of buy-in. It's like, if you don't have the right leadership, you're not going to have collaboration, because everybody's going to withdraw to their way of doing things, and you're going to have friction when that collaboration doesn't happen. So it's when the lowest point above the hierarchy where the teams meet is gold and should be paid a lot of money, because that person or those people, whoever those stakeholders are, whoever can have enough ownership, that's where it's going to fall apart. It's usually not going to be an individual underneath, because it's up to management it's up to HR to hire, but it's like everything's got to be in place. But at some point, somebody's got to say, the buck stops here. Do it. This is where it happens. This is where it doesn't happen, or fosters enough of, in the opposite of what I'm calling a benevolent tyrant, there's enough of a spirit, an esprit de corps, or a shared mission that that people don't, that are self-motivated enough not to fall through the cracks. I was being cynical in my sort of characterization of a team where it's like you've got somebody cracking a whip, but obviously like, you know, a ground up approach, as long as but somebody's got to take ownership and responsibility and foster this idea that we're all working toward the same end. Mm-hmm. And people will naturally gravitate toward the people that they work with. They're going to naturally gravitate toward the people that are on their own teams, the people that they have the longest trends of loyalty toward. And and obviously every craftsperson, every technician is going to gravitate toward the way they've always done things because they want to get home. They want to do it. They don't want to learn a new thing. They don't want to adapt to a new system. And so if you're pushing a change, somebody's got to be the cheerleader for that change. And I say cheerleader optimistically, but somebody's also got to be the teeth to enforce the change. And so if you don't have that structure in place, it's really, really hard to get ideal collaboration. That's my thought.
Yeah. So I'm going to take the undefined handoff process. All right. So for me, in my experience, this typically looks like mismatched expectations. Okay. The software engineer was expecting to be able to see a mid-fidelity prototype or wireframes or something early on. And I come to them with a fully functioning, high fidelity final design. And they say, whoa, wait a minute. You've made a lot of decisions here that I didn't even get to speak into. Okay. So there was a mismatch between what the software engineer was expecting to see and what I actually created. Often undefined handoff could mean I do a wonderful design, meets all expectations, but I don't really include annotations or explanations or documentation about certain behaviors, and it's a lot of ambiguity. So here's what happens when the software team is working on the designs and they have to stop and set up a meeting, which I might not be available that day. So I become a blocker because I haven't defined in the handoff the way certain things should work or the way they should look. And so leaving ambiguity there means that I become a blocker, and it pushes back the time that it takes to deliver it. So that's undefined handoff process is a big challenge.
I want to just throw in a personal peeve of mine about this that I think all software developers can relate to, and probably all designers too, which is that good documentation is platinum. And it's not trivial, and it's not easy, and it's not common. And so when you see something like the new React documentation or the Ruby on Rails documentation, and it's easy to take it for granted. Amazing documentation is worth its weight in gold. And so I'm just putting that out there because that's kind of what we're talking about is, in addition to the great design, right? In addition to let's say you have fantastic code. You write this beautiful code. You have no comments. You name your variables terribly, and you include no documentation. Congratulations. You've written great code that is impossible to patch, impossible to test, and you've created a single point of failure where if you leave the company, everybody else has to play catch up to figure out what this amazing thing you did was. And so it's in the zeal to learn design or in the zeal to learn coding, it's easy to forget about the explanatory parts of it, such as leaving fantastic comments at the minimum, or creating excellent documentation for something that's intended for a wider release or a larger team. It's just it can't be emphasized enough, and the part of that is because it's never emphasized. It's like the last thing that goes into something, and there's very rarely a person who is in charge of wrangling all the changes together and creating great documentation. But man, oh man, if I saw that on a team, I'd be like, these people are serious.
Listen, there is a sinking feeling that you get when you are given a feature to work on, and you go back to look at the designs, and it's just a mess. Everything is named random things. There's no grouping. There's no documentation, and you just know, like, I've just lost a week's worth of work to have to kind of build this thing up to spec.
That's actually, it's one of those things that I've noticed in tutorials. Like there's a really great tool of if you're interested in 3D graphics, there's a great tool called 3JS. There's a fantastic class called 3JS Journey. And one of the things I love about the teacher of that class, his name's Bruno Simon, and he starts every single thing he does, he writes comments. He's saying, this is the section for the lighting. This is the section for the models. This is the section for the textures. He does that first thing. He doesn't just bust into it. He goes, how is this organized? It's great because you think, well, whoever's following in his footsteps, whoever's watching this is going to have that as an ideal. I don't live up to, I'm being a hypocrite. Like, I wish I did this more, but it's like I said, it's like one of those things where really, because so many people fall short of this, it's like, I would just love to see a team where this was like a dedicated person, where it was like somebody's writing this documentation. Anyway.
Well, honestly, that's why I put number one as a lack of investment in good tools and processes. That's the sort of umbrella over a lot of these things, right? To me, it all comes back to incentives, right? People are incentivized to go, deliver faster, right? And then, so these are the things that are skipped over, right? These are the things that are left at the last second if they're done at all. But these are the things that make a huge difference to ultimately the customer, right? But also to the team itself, right? Because there is a high degree, I think, of number 7, burnout, overwhelm, and dysfunction because of the lack of number 1. I'm going to kick it over to you. What do you think? You want to pick another number on here?
I mean, it's scope creep, burnout, different priorities. I think that a lot of those are kind of I almost want to move forward just because I feel like a lot of those are going to be project and team specific, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think my workflow mismatches. I look at that as coming into the stakeholders, ownership, and teams. And I feel blessed to have heard your talk about the undefined handoff process. So I think I'm golden. Yeah.
All right. So ways to overcome those barriers. One of the big things that I have found in my career are crucial touch points. Only 5-year-olds like to be surprised. Nobody likes to be surprised at work. Okay. You might think that you're working on this amazing, innovative, you're going to blow the VP of product's mind with this new design. You've gotten such amazing feedback from customers. Like, you're ready to go. You do this big presentation, and all of a sudden you hear, oh, we've changed priorities. The budget's been reduced. Blah, blah, blah. Whatever the reason is, okay? No one likes to be surprised. So I have many times presented my work to someone and I was so proud of it, but I had not done my due diligence to keep them apprised, to keep them informed, because they, again, have their own incentives and their own communication up the sort of chain of command where they need to keep their people informed. Don't surprise your peers on your team. Don't surprise your manager or your boss. Thompson, you have anything?
Yeah, I guess it's not as a coder. I'm thinking about the flow and like I'm thinking in terms of steps. I'm already breaking it down like a function. And what I want is I want what and when and why. And I think that what and when is pretty standard for it's called a deadline, right?
Yeah.
But the why part of why is this, what is this building toward, who's it going to be handed off to, and sort of, I think there are really cool modern tools. It's one of the things I really like about Asana is that as a product, as a process tool, Asana is really good. And I think Monday does similar stuff, but being able to see like, what are the constituent components of this? What are the thresholds that need to be met? And what are we expecting it to look like when when does it come back to me? When should it come back to me? Should I be expecting it to come back to me? Are there people who are going to see it where I should anticipate their feedback? And I think having some of those systems, again, I think about Asana because it's the best one I've seen, but anything like that where you can say, what does success look like where I'm not going to see this again? What does failure look like where I am going to see this again? And like you said, this is something that can be very frustrating when you don't know enough of the moving parts above your level.
Yeah.
But what can I anticipate where my work can all be vaporized? Like if I'm going to have to start over from zero, I don't necessarily hate that, but I'd like to know what I should be on the lookout for. Like you said, surprises are not lovely at work.
Yeah.
And especially for projects like software development, where a good website with professionals can just take so long to build. And so understanding what are our thresholds, what are our deadlines, and why are they there? And as a corollary, what could influence those? And I think a lot of this is going to comes down to what sort of leadership do you have? Who are the team members who are in place to be more candid with you? And also, one of the things I love about a great manager or a great leader is being a shield and sort of letting me do my job to the best of my ability, and I don't want to talk about all this other stuff, right? But what are the windows? Like you said, I like that you have that shared rituals. It's interesting because I think it's tenuous, because it's also like, why are you telling someone on my team what to do is very reasonable, very, very, very reasonable. And so, and I want a manager to bite someone's head off if they're trying to give me a position, like I want a manager who's like, no, they don't work for you. They work for me. That's great, because it means I'm safer. I can do my job. But that said, if they're like setting up a structure where designers and coders can have some level of communication with each other so they can respect and understand each other's needs, or a channel like in a tool like Asana where you can at least see the interplay happening, right? If the managers aren't protective of their teams, which again, there's a trade-off there. Like a lot of this is about the gray areas, because there's always a trade-off, and I want to be protected by my manager. And I think that being given orders from 6 different managers is horrible. Yeah. And so, which again, that ties back to number 4 and number 2, which is, how can we be sure that those communication channels are open in a way that isn't exploitive and time wasting? And also how far up has to be on board to make the rest of the stuff work. And that's a company culture kind of thing.
Absolutely. The nature of bullet points, they're sort of siloed off 1, 2, 3, 4, but in reality, these are all mixed together, right? Sure. And to just wrap up this slide, the trust and communication part, I think it's just so important to say, like, it does start with mutual respect. It kind of starts at the human level, right? But let's be honest, like, our blood sugar gets low. Like, we didn't sleep the night before, your dog kept you up, whatever, right? We're not always going to be above the line. We're going to often go below the line. So you need a good company culture, a good team culture. You deposit trust is the way I like to think of it. It's the way I explain it to my children. I'm like, okay, think of a bucket, right? You got a bucket full of trust. Every sort of deadline that you blow past, or every time someone pings you in Asana or Slack and you don't respond for 2 days or whatever it is, like, you're slowly taking things out of the trust bucket, right? That stuff's going to happen. It's going to happen all the time, but you have to think about depositing like goodwill or trust back into the bucket. I don't know where my analogy is going there.
I like it.
Yeah,
I like it a lot.
Yeah. But the idea is that you should have systems and safeguards, because it's not going to always go well. And that's why we have things like design systems. That's why we have things like quality assurance checks. It's why we have these safeguards, right? Because it's just not always going to be perfect. We're human, we're fallible. So let's quickly talk through some design systems. So Airbnb, I'm sure we're all familiar with. Huge, quick, rapid scale. This company grew. They so much VC money thrown. So they grew larger than they were able to sustain some of their apps and their designs. Everything kind of started to look differently. Lots of different teams, lots of different people. New hires didn't understand the way things should be. How do they solve this problem? They created a design language system. So what this did is it allowed everyone across different functions and teams, whether you're a senior designer or a junior designer, whether you're a principal software engineer or an associate engineer, you are all using the same components, you're using the same styles, you're using the same vocabulary to talk about those things. And we're going to talk in just a minute about why shared vocabulary is such a deal breaker between things flowing well and things just really falling apart. Okay, so the design systems, what's the benefit? Think about it like the guide to Legos. Does anybody like Legos? Anybody ever play with Legos still as an adult? Just me? Okay. Oh, good. Thompson does. So your design system.
I have a nephew, so.
Okay, yeah. So my two boys love that. I mean, I love it. Interestingly enough, they would not be good designers or software engineers because they don't like to follow the guidelines, the book. They just want to build their own stuff. So, you know, I don't know, they're off somewhere else, not on my design team, but you take the design book and it tells you all the visual elements, the behaviors and guidelines to use to build this thing in a cohesive and efficient way. What that lets you do as a designer, again, you're consistent. It helps you not reinvent the design wheel every single time you come up against a similar situation. Everybody is familiar with clicking buttons and filling out form fields. Everyone is familiar with onboarding to new apps. There's just these common patterns that by now, in a mature digital software tech industry, we kind of know how these things should work. Of course, there's a little room for innovation and experimentation. That's fun every once in a while. For the most part, your customers don't want it. Okay, they want to be able to do the thing that they need to do without your pretty designs getting in the way. Okay, if you can have both, great. But the design system is really the Lego guidebook that is going to get you to the cool car or Star Wars set or Jurassic Park or whatever the hell the thing is now. So how do these systems break down? So we're going to get into a little bit about how do you build things with a design system? How do you even build a design system? One helpful way to think about it is something called atomic design. And that is where you have atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and screens. Okay. Atoms are the smallest piece that can be broken down. These are the color red, okay, for your errors, or your brand color blue, okay? These are the smallest things. This is the border radius around your form field, or this is the shadow behind the drop down, okay? It's the smallest component. When you put several atoms together, what do you get? You get a molecule. So what is a button made out of? Well, buttons usually have a color. They may have a border around the inside fill, probably some text, may have a shadow, right? So all of those things come together to make a molecule. Well, what do buttons usually go with? Well, the button might go with some form fields when you're signing up for a new product. It may also go with some helper text, right? It may go with a link to log in instead of sign up. So you've got this collection of molecules together that make up an organism. Okay, so the organism might be the entire card where you collect all the form fields and the buttons and the signups, and then you keep going up and up and up. So you start to understand how these things build up into cohesive designs. And what the design system does is it breaks it all down into these tiny pieces and then shows you how you can build them back up. So let's do a quick demonstration. Actually, I think that would be cool. I'm going to go off script a bit. So I'm popping open Figma here, and what I have is a design system. And I'm using a pretty simple example for us. Okay, so what I have here are a bunch of input drop downs. Okay, so I can click on select team member. There's some helper hint text down here, right? And then this just shows the different states of what happens. When it's active, it gets the purple border, and then you get the drop down. So all these are different variations and states, right? If I have icons, it's going to look like this. If the user has filled out a profile and uploaded their photo, it'll look like this. Okay, so if I'm thinking about a component and I'm working with a software engineer, I'm going to do a little experiment and put Thompson on the spot. I'm going to toggle Figma into dev mode. And Thompson, what I'd love for you to do is tell me a little bit about what you're seeing over here on the right. What are you thinking about as a software engineer if you're looking at this one component and I'm clicking on it? What is this dev mode telling you?
Well, I mean, it's giving me all of the attributes and properties that are going to go with the element when it is placed into our front end system, so that I can replicate your work as a designer. So, over on, again, as far as the specifics of state label, hint text, supporting scroll bar, all those things, I'm curious about how they actually get implemented in my internal system. And I see then at layout, we've got it's determined that it's flex, the flex and flex direction. I want to know, like, I want to know where those come from. But what I'm seeing are the individual elements that I'm being handed in order to implement and then recreate what you're doing here. And hopefully what I really want to see is the result of that very, very bottom button on the bottom right.
Oh,
No, where you had it before. On the very bottom right, I'm most interested in that. I'm most interested
in export.
Yeah. I want to know, like, because what I'm most curious about as a developer is, if you give me this as a component as a developer, what do I have to do to match you? Is the way that I'm thinking, because I can see that you've got the explanation for state. I can see that you've got the explanation for all the individual CSS attributes that I'm going to be implementing. But I'm also curious about what I'd like to do ideally is nothing. Right. What I'd like to do is to just take it and then throw it in the page and have it work. And so what I'm most curious about, because like as it is, what I get is, I see it's an input. I see that it's a select option box, and I see that we have some attributes that I want to pass in, presumably through. Those of you who don't know, there is a I'm trying to speak to the fact that there are some extreme new beginners, right? There are some people who have never touched before. And so there's a concept in development, in front-end development, called a component. And it's something you're going to encounter a lot. And in Flatiron, we've dedicated our front-end education largely to the most popular component-based front-end framework, which is called React, which was developed by Facebook, now Meta. And so what happens in React is, so if you've got any experience in HTML, you might have an input, right? Lowercase I, input. And there are various ways to write it. And eventually in React, you would have it in a sort of a container block where it would be written slightly differently. But that input, instead of being the garden variety, most basic version of an input that you get stock standard from HTML, it would be something that has a lot more bells and whistles. And the reason I say that is because eventually, in order to match what someone like Joshua gives me, I'm going to throw it into a component. Yeah, it's going to look something like this, where what it's going to be is this React JSX, and that's going to answer all these questions. And I don't have to do much more other than sort of make sure that this is all what it's supposed to be, and that I can that I can throw it on a website, I can throw it into an existing design and use it as is. And yeah, and this is also with what a designer gives you, not necessarily what I want to kind of follow up on this when you're done with the example, but this is sort of I hope, did I pass? Did I get the job?
Yeah, actually. Yeah. So the one thing I did want you to extrapolate on is you talked about attributes, right? The different attributes of the component. Can you define a little bit about what you mean by attributes?
Sure. So if you go back to the original view, where you clicked on it and you got the inspector, the Figma inspector. So you can see there that what we've got on where he has his mouse, where Josh has his mouse, we've got some traits, right? So they're called props, and what that's short for properties. And each one of these is, that's not necessarily something that I automatically associate with input. So when I get an input, I'm going to assume it has there are certain things we get if you go to W3 schools or you go to the MDN that Joshua referenced earlier. You can go to those as we're talking right now, and you look up what an input is. It actually doesn't have hint text. It's not, the label is actually a separate thing. State, not included at all. The scroll bar relationship is not something that I'm necessarily going to associate automatically with an input. And so to me, I'm digging in and I'm seeing that he's got these attributes that beg more questions. And so that's why that was where I zeroed in, because I said, what's weird here? Yeah. And that was the first question that I had, was I see things that I associate with, like for instance, on an input field, the name attribute, that comes out of the box. The value attribute, that comes out of the box. There are certain things that come out of the box with an input, whereas hint text ain't one of them. And so I want to know what I want to know how each one of these works, because I'm thinking as a developer, I'm thinking somebody's going to have to actually make this work. And that's where I'm thinking.
Yep. And so what he's talking about, I've already designed here. These are the answers to the questions that he has, right? As a designer, it is my job to show that there should be a scroll bar here, or define what the behavior is. It's my job to show what the state looks like when you hover over a name, right? See how you've got the background hover? It's my job to say, okay, in this component, there should be 8 pixels of margin between the container and the name. There should be 8 pixels between spacing between the icon and the container for the name. So thinking through all of these different states takes time. And if you want them defined, then you have to design them. And again, the whole point of a design system is that you do it once, right? Every time you have a drop down, whether you have 2 drop downs in your application or 400, it should behave the same, right? So you define it in one place, and then let's say 2 years goes by and like Thompson leaves and I leave the company, another designer and software engineer come, and they say, you know what, we really need to update this. This isn't working for us anymore. The brand changes its, whatever it is, whatever the reason. You make the change in one place in the design, you make the change in one place in the code on that component, and all 400 of the drop downs are going to update because you've changed it in one place. That's the sort of ideal behavior of the system. So yes.
So since I know that we're running pretty short on time.
Yep.
I wanted to show everyone some stuff, because I mentioned React, and I know that if you haven't coded before, it can be pretty intense, but I wanted to I'm pasting in here. And these are some libraries where you can see, and the top one is Materia, which is it uses the material design set. Mantine is my favorite because it's free and open source, but these are examples of component libraries that already exist that are using this exact same philosophy. Every single, like the idea behind using something Material UI is whenever it's a checkbox, the checkbox behaves the exact same way every single time. And that they've already thought about, how does this look on a mobile? How does this look on a tablet? And so you can see these live published examples that you can implement. Again, make sure you get your JavaScript up to snuff, but you could see how you can just quickly come up with something where somebody's already answered all the questions that Josh has just asked with something that's already out there. Because I know for beginners, it can be difficult to go from the abstraction that we're talking about to the actionable. And so I want you to have these examples that you can really play with, put your hands on, and see how it's implemented.
Absolutely. And designers, if you're out there, go visit these and play around with them. Look at the code. You don't even have to understand yet like what's going on there, but kind of look at the structure of it. I would love to keep going. Obviously, Thompson and I have a lot to say, a lot of ideas and opinions, but if there's any quick questions, Corey, could we take one question?
Yeah, 100%.
If anybody has a question.
We've been dying for them
Don't
the whole
be shy.
time.
Come on, guys. This has been great. They're intimidated now. Thanks.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I kind of made it. Like...
That's what I tried to say. I ran away 4 times before I finally learned, right? If you guys are interested, please talk with us over at admission.
Oh, no, that's...
Okay, cool. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That sounds like, just Steve, what do you want to talk about? Oh,
yeah, absolutely. Please follow up with us
yeah, for sure.
Email or whatever, thompson.plyler@Flatiron School, Joshua.Robinson@Flatiron School, admissions@Flatiron School. We'd love to talk with you and hear what you think about any of this. So, or hear your feedback.
Well, thank you both. This was such an amazing presentation. I love being able to see you guys just the banter back and forth and seeing how like the UX and the dev side kind of go together. And like, I'm just like watching your guys' brains like spark in motion, which is always really fun. So thank you again for presenting again for me today. And we hope that we'll see you all again soon. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
All right. Bye,
Bye everyone.